Hello everyone, welcome to this PowerPoint presentation. WMPA TV, the past, the present, and the future. I gave a speech on this topic a few weeks ago at the West Melton Rotary Club. I ended up not using the PowerPoint presentation, but I'd made it, so I thought I'd record it for posterity. So here we go. All right. The past, the 1980s. The 1980s was the golden era of cable television. This was when cable was its most popular. It was at its peak. Everybody wanted it. And it was the thing, man. This was before personal computers, so the TV was still king in the household. And just fun times. This was when there was the most community access stations in the country. It was mandated by law that cable suppliers had to offer the ability for communities to have public, educational, and government access stations. And West Melton sees that. In the 80s, you had Piqua had one for a amount of time, Tip City, KITTV, and Tip, and Troy Access Channel 5. KIT TV and WMPA are the oldest of the two still in existence. Piqua lost theirs and reestablished it a few years back. It's now known as the Indian Nation Station and is operated by and out of the Piqua school system, the high school in particular. All right. 1980s, cable was king. Most, if not all, the cable stations were financed through mandated franchise fees that were received by the municipalities. The internet was in its early years. It was around, but it wasn't really accessible to the masses, and it was very limited in what it could do. It was mostly just text boxes and just some simple messaging and emails, things of that sort. Volunteer involvement at cable stations was at its peak during this time because being on TV was the cool thing to be. Before there were YouTube influencers and online agitators, there were cable TV nerds. That's the category which I fall into. Technology. Well, back then, especially in a low-budget facility such as WMPA, everything was manually operated. It didn't matter what you were doing. Everything had to be operated manually. Your typical gear, all right, if you wanted to go and do a basketball game, would have been a camera, just a camera, a separate VCR, a separate power supply or some battery packs, and a tripod. And then if you wanted audio, well, then you'd have to bring a soundboard, a microphone, appropriate connections, things of that sort as well. And what you need on the audio side really hasn't changed too much over these years. It's went from analog to digital to hybrid. So the audio side of things really hasn't changed too much. Just the quality of it has gotten better. Video editing. Everything was recorded onto tape. All editing was linear. In most facilities, you could only do cuts only. You couldn't necessarily fade from one tape to another unless you had big bucks. We're talking $50, $60, $100,000 invested in an editing suite. You simply just had cuts only editing. And that was just the reality of the time. All right. Live events. At wmpa, live events had to emanate from the municipal building. That was the only place we could go live from. Now, if we were in the municipal building, we did have an inexpensive or relatively inexpensive switcher. And so long as we were using the studio cameras that were designed to be used in such an environment, we could do some fades and some things of that sort. But, we had the council room to shoot in. We didn't have and never have had a dedicated studio where we could have green screens and proper lighting and proper acoustics and things of that sort. And that's unfortunately true to this very day. That's why so much of what we do and what we buy is set up to be able to be used remotely, because we really don't have in-house production facilities for anything outside of council meetings and, little sit-down things of that sort. Now, local media in the 1980s. Boy, it was everywhere. You had WMPA, of course. You had the West Mountain Record, the Early Bird, not listed on here, but the Stillwater Valley Advertiser, the Troy Daily News, the Dayton Daily News, the Journal Herald. You had WHIO, WDTN, WKEF, and you had a multitude of radio stations that were all locally operated and locally staffed. So, if you got your word out to these folks there, you could pretty much get the word out to everybody in the community in the 1980s. The 1990s came around, folks, and I consider these the lost years for WMPA, and for a variety of reasons. The early 80s started out very much like the early 90s started out very much like the late 80s. We did the same type of programming, the government meetings, sporting broadcasts, things of that sort. But in the 1990s came along, things started to change a bit. And it was enough to where it sort of gave everybody a pause. And it's also, you started to see some local access stations starting to struggle a bit in the 1990s. Like I'd mentioned, in the 80s, cable was king. I think cable probably peaked out in the early 90s somewhere, but you could already see some signs of its fall and demise. And there were a variety of reasons for that. Cable franchise fees were still an important part of financing the stations. In fact, in the early 90s, our station had hundreds of thousands of dollars where we had gotten franchise fees all through the 80s, and we spent very little of it. So we actually had a nest egg of $200,000-$300,000 sitting in the municipal accounts. In the 90s, the city needed to update a sewer plant. Well, they took all that money, used it on the sewer plant, and we never got that money back. So if I ask for $10,000, $15,000 in 2024, I spend that amount of money in 2024. Because if I don't, it's lost forever. And there's no promise you're going to get that money in the future. That's why governments spend too much, in my opinion, but that's just how the game is played. Alright, in the 90s, internet was becoming a serious thing. Hey, this fad's going to really take off. So people were flocking more and more to the internet. They weren't necessarily going home, having supper, sitting down in front of the TV and watching television. They were starting to sit down and play video games on the computers, or they'd be checking out the websites that were popping up like crazy in the 90s, and they were going there for information. Also, people that normally would send us information to put on our message board, they started, we got a website now, we're going to put it on there. And so getting information and the utilization of the cable stations, especially the community bulletin board, you started to see some decline on that. Volunteers, also you started seeing fewer volunteers because, again, PC ruled the day. People wanted to be computer masters and do all kinds of new things on computers. Technology in the wmpa. Well, it really didn't change too terribly much. Playback by this point could be semi-automated by the latter half of the 90s. I would still have, I believe at one time I had like 4 or 6 VHS decks that were hooked up to a little device. I could go in, press a few buttons, tell it to play deck 1 from 8 a.m. to 7:22 and things of that sort. It was a little cumbersome, and if I had 6 decks and I had 7 programs, well, at some point I would have had to go in there and swap out a tape and reprogram that deck to play it when I wanted to. Don't get me wrong, that's a lot better than having to sit there every time you played back a program, but it was still a little bit cumbersome and wasn't always entirely reliable either, to be honest. If you wanted to do a simple single camera basketball game in the 90s, now you only had to take a camcorder. And so you took your camcorder, which you You had to plug in the power to the camcorder, but it wasn't a big bulky pack like before, or you just slid a battery into the back of the camcorder. It wasn't a separate unit. A tripod, your sound gear, which again really hadn't changed too much. And because we were carrying less gear around in terms of power supplies and extra VCRs and things of that sort, it became possible and practical that you could carry along a spare monitor, or if you were lucky, a monitor that was also a recording deck, so that you could have some backups and have bigger monitors to see what you were doing. I can't stress how much we all loved monitors coming on the scene. It's a lot better than looking through a little tiny viewfinder, let me tell you. And this was before LCD screens and all that too. So monitors were big and bulky, but they were worth hauling around. Live events for WMPA in the 90s. They typically occurred at the municipal building, though towards the latter half of the decade, we did establish an ability to be able to broadcast out of the middle school gym, the old middle school. This involved me running a cable the entire length of the building, and we could set it up, but it was cumbersome. At the time, the broadcast units that broadcast out of the cable station was a big bulky rack that had several components into it. Essentially, I'd have to take this station off the air, take out all those modules, haul them to the school, hook the rack back up at the school, reinstall all those modules, and hope for the best. We did a few school board meetings that way, and they were well received, but it really wasn't, practical in the sense to have to take your TV station off the air and move, and plus it was hard keeping the connections looking good because it didn't take much to degrade the signal, especially back in those days. Local media, you still had WMPA back in the 90s, of course. You had the Early Bird, you had the Stillwater Valley Advertiser, the West Mountain Record, you had the Troy Daily News. By this point, the Dayton Daily News and the Journal Herald were one paper. Journal Herald, I think, faded out towards the end of the 90s, if I remember right. You still had your network TV stations. That didn't change too much. A variety of radio stations. And you had the addition of websites in the 1990s. Everybody needed a website. So that was an interesting time. So. Then comes the new millennium in the 2000s. The digital age. Now, that was a very difficult time in wmpa. It's sort of, the first half of it was sort of an addition to the lost years in a lot of ways. Cable falls. By this time you had DirecTV, Dish Network. They were really biting into the cable subscription. As a result, the cable franchise fees began to decrease. Cities were getting less every year. Cable companies were merging, so that smaller cable company that loved the access stations and would bend over backwards to help you out, they were sort of like, yeah, we just got to put up with you, So it wasn't quite the working relationship it had been in the 80s and even into the 90s. And like I said, you had satellite providers going up, taking the audience away. Got into the 2000s, internet speeds were picking up. Video was starting to become possible. I remember sitting at home on my computer at 9/11 and being able to watch some small streaming, not full frame, not full, frame rate streaming on 9/11 on CNN and all that. So people were starting to turn to the internet for video at this point. This was also the heyday of Napster. So it was coming to its own. You could see which direction it was headed, and people were just loving it. And, as computers drew more and more and more people, people to the PC and the internet, getting volunteers, let's be honest, since the 2000s has become pretty much impossible. You talk to any cable station that relies on volunteers, it's tough. It's sort of like if you work in a business and you wonder why you can't hire people since COVID. Well, volunteers have been like that for the past 20 years or so. You talk to anybody that's involved in any kind of volunteer organization, I'm sure they would agree with me. Technology. Here's where It was an interesting time for technology. Um, Digital production was becoming a thing. You could tell there was no doubt that's the way it was going to go. You could tell high definition was on the horizon, and the ability to up your game graphically for a station like WMPA was improving tremendously. You had programs like Corel Paint, Photoshop begin to come on the scenes really well and begin being used for a variety of applications. And more importantly, the price of that became available to where a low budget station like ours could actually consider doing such a thing. To do graphics in the 1980s would have took very specialized equipment and cost tens of thousands of dollars, and that just wasn't a possibility. In the 2000s, it was right at our fingertips. Some of it was still a little pricey, or we didn't quite have what we needed to do it yet, but you could tell those days were coming, and that part was exciting. As I mentioned, you could see this stuff was coming, and a lot of it was just right out of our price range and just away from our fingertips. So that sort of put us in the limbo. By that, I mean we really didn't spend much at all. It didn't make any sense to upgrade and do a lot with analog technology when you knew the digital was right around the corner, and then once you got one thing digital, everything else was going to be digital. So it just made no sense to invest in new equipment until we could invest in it properly. So we bought very little in the 1990s, really. Just a camera to get us by, updated some audio stuff, which we're still using for council meetings, by the way. And we started buying laptops and laptops in the early 2000s, so we could do some graphics and things of the sort. The area we really worked at in the mid 90s up through the early 2000s, while we were waiting for the video technology coming around. That's when we really started to up our graphics. We were making graphics in Corel Paint or Photoshop. Gone were the days in the 80s when everything was coded on an Atari 800 computer using DOS. Our community bulletin board looked great. In fact, I would say in the 90s and early 2000s, the wmpa message board was the best looking message board in the state. Everybody else was still using old coded things, or if you remember the old Channel 13 on Time Warner, they gave you the weather and the time and only had like 3 colors and was 8-bit and all that. Everybody was using that kind of thing. But we were top notch. So that's sort of where we put our focus. I didn't do much in the way of sports in the 2000s. Part of that was because by that point I was married and had 2 or 3 kids. So they were taking up my time. But honestly, part of it was politics. Got to a point where the council questioned me doing school events, saying the school ought to be paying, and then the athletic directors and the coaches didn't want to do sporting events because they're afraid the neighboring community might gain an unfair advantage by being able to watch the videos. And I got tired of it. I didn't have time for all that crap, to be honest with you. I knew that if another team wanted to get video of you, even in the 90s and 2000s, that they most certainly were going to get video of you. There's nothing you could do to stop it. The council members saying, well, the school ought to be paying and all that. I'd look at them and go, you're absolutely right. I think that'd be great to have a partnership. I go, that'd be a great legislative process. You're part of the legislature, so if you want that to happen, you're the one that needs to make that happen. I'd be happy to have discussions and consider it. Well, that, of course, went nowhere. So I'd say for a great part of the 2000s, first half of 2000s, I did as little as I felt like I needed to do to justify the little bit of money I was getting. And it was just because either A, the technology wasn't there. My equipment by that time, a lot of it was approaching 20 years old, and I knew the crap what I was producing was not up to par to what it should be, and I was using inferior equipment, making an inferior product for people that weren't appreciative of my efforts. And so I really, really scaled back. And that's just was the reality of those years. Local media. You had wmpa. You had the West Melton Record, and the early bird was still around, Stillwater Valley Advertiser. You had the Troy Daily News, Dayton Daily, Journal Herald was gone. You had network stations, and radio stations, but by this time, automation was really taking hold. So you might still have WHIO, WDTN, all these guys, but a lot of what they're doing is actually produced out of market. They didn't have the resources. They were focusing on where the people and the money and the sponsors were. They're caring less and less about smaller communities like West Melton, for instance. Radio stations, same thing. A lot of radio stations went from being fully staffed radio stations to being a computer and a transmitter. Local websites, everybody had a website. But if you didn't know where to go, it was everywhere. MySpace, Facebook, Twitter, social media started coming on the scene there around 2007, 2008, back around then. So, again, that drew people away, but it created some new opportunities too. The 2010s. Now, I call this the area of convergence. This is when things really started to change at wmpa and in the media production as a whole. Cable. It's really fallen by this part. Satellite's really taken hold. You're getting things like you're being able to watch Netflix on TV. YouTube was coming along. I mean, people just weren't investing in cable like they were. Access stations started to shut down at a rapid rate. Troy shut down. No longer exists. There are countless others in Ohio and in the country that just closed up. They just couldn't get volunteers anymore. They relied entirely on franchise fees, which really weren't around anymore. With deregulation, a lot of those went away, and those that didn't go away saw the amount drop substantially due to fewer customers. And sort of scary times. By this point, the internet is king. Even though I'm still doing a cable station, the internet, it's here to stay. It's the future. There was no denying it come the 2010s. That was the way, that was the present, that was the future. And the writing was on the wall. Volunteerism, what was there before, it's gone by now, folks. I mean, it's just gone. Convergence. All right, like I mentioned before, at the latter half of the early 2000s, big media mergers just rapidly beginning. We're down to like 6 major companies owning like a ridiculous amount of the media, which is why things are so biased as they are. There's just not enough players in the game to keep them all honest. It's as simple as that. Technology and software make for a rapid expansion of capabilities across many platforms. Things like, all the Adobe products. Photoshop was originally meant for, print media. Well, it suddenly became, hey, this is great for web design. This can be used for broadcasting. We can use it for print. A variety of platforms and software could be applied to like web-based, broadcast-based, and print-based media. It all converged together, it grouped together, the software, all that capabilities, technology grouped together, and by doing so, it made it available to us, and it dropped the prices down to where things were much more affordable. With the internet, by the early 2010s and all that, 2013, I think, 14 is when WMPA started streaming. Once that happened, I could take a broadcast, and I could broadcast to the entire world as easy as I could broadcast to West Melton. It all converged together. So in a lot of ways, the world got much, much smaller because of convergence. Technology at wmpa. Again, Photoshop, Premiere. We used it for everything. All the editing, everything we did, it was used extensively. It's still used a bit, not so much Premiere, but Photoshop still used quite a bit. Like many digital things, it's one subscription-based now. it cost about $1,000 a year to have access to all those products. And you know, I've almost got solutions that are cheaper or free for everything. Photoshop, though, it's still light years above everything else. And if you're getting a subscription to Photoshop, they charge so much for that, you might as well get a subscription to their whole creative suite. So until I find something that does everything that Photoshop can do for me, such as GIMP, which I'm working at, but I'm not quite a pro at, I still bite the bullet on that, though I see an end of that expenditure coming in the next year or two. That's one of my goals. Graphics. Like I said, by this time, graphics are incorporated in anything. I can't tell you the last time that I did a production where I didn't have any kind of graphics at all. This program's all graphics. That allowed me to give the station a professional look. It allowed me to brand things, so my school productions look different from my municipal productions, and when I do something that's wmpa based, it's got a different set of graphics for that. Coming up, I got the Miami County Fair. It'll have a different look than what the 4th of July will. It really lets you up your game and round out your productions. So the abilities with graphics in the past 20 years have just been mind-blowing. By this point, playback's automated. I had a server. I could program it. I uploaded the video onto the server, told it when to play it, what days, what time. It took care of it. It stored it, it saved it, it archived it. Easy peasy. Unfortunately, about the time I got the ability to do that, my production levels had dropped. So it was nice to have that, but back in the 1980s and 90s when we were doing 300 distinct programs a year, oh, that would have been heaven. Yeah, back in the 80s when we were doing 300 programs a year, there was somebody sitting in the studio playing those all back. Big time commitment. HD content. Around 2012-13, I finally got down with the city manager. I'm like, hey, we need to update. I go, anything that we want to buy from now on is going to have to be HD. Everything's HD. So if we're going to do HD, you can't piecemeal it and do it over the course of 2 or 3 years. If we're going to go to HD, we need to do it all at once so that it all talks together, works together, happy together. That's when we got the cameras that are in the council room now. Those are HD. That's when we got the new switcher that could handle HD. All that happened in the early 2013 or so. And it also, the same equipment, again, caused a convergence. The same stuff and cards that were capturing my video and recording it on the computer also had the ability to stream. So we started streaming on YouTube since the capability was there and there was no cost involved. Also by that time, Facebook was firmly established, so I created a Facebook page so that I had another online source to promote what was going on. Technology at wmpa. Live content could be broadcast from the municipal building. Like I said, and we began live streaming. Remote streaming was possible, however, you had to have a good internet connection. And getting access at the old school, getting access to the internet was always problematic. It wasn't always reliable, wasn't necessarily as fast as you needed to be. And you had a lot of stuff you had to carry around. Like I would have had to carry around a full-time PC at that point to make it was possible, but it just wasn't necessarily practical at the time. Local media, you had wmpa. The Early Bird, I believe, was still around. Stillwater Valley Advertiser. You had the Miami Valley Today became a thing. Gone was the Troy Daily News, the Piqua Herald. They became the Miami Valley Today. And boy, did they downsize. In fact, I think they ought to rename themselves the I-75 Gazette. Because if you're not up and down the I-75, they really don't care about you. That's just my observation. Dayton Daily News, they merged, their same company owns WHIO, so they actually merged resources and buildings and offices, personnel, and so they downsized, and again, they focus more on Dayton, and they care less and less about us smaller communities all the time. Network TV stations, again, like I said, they just kept downsizing. A lot of graphics aren't even made in the this local stations anymore. It might be somebody in Philadelphia sits there and makes all the graphics for 50 stations around the country every day. Radio stations, more and more automated, just computers with a transmitter. More local websites. Everybody had a website by 2010s. Everybody. And everybody got the idea, well, if you want to know what we're doing, you need to go to our website. The habit of getting information out to other people and other organizations that could help you promote had really, really died down. And it's a shame, really. And that's still something we struggle with a little bit. MySpace was around, but they faded out. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram came online, things of that sort. So this sort of creates an interesting dynamic. All right, because you have the top half here. Like I said, they really downsized and they didn't care about you too much, okay? But the websites, the social media, people started using that instead of these up here, instead of the ones up top. And so that became more and more of a challenge. So the world was much smaller. Like I said, you could transmit to the world easily. But now, with everybody split onto the internet and a gazillion different social media sites and all these websites, communicating with the community was actually, and still is, harder than communicating with the world, if that makes any sense. Crazy, I know, but the truth. The 2020s, the present at WMPA. Convergence continues. All right? Think about it. Most people are consuming content on their phones today. We see it all the time. All right? Everyone goes live from everywhere. Food reviews, vacation vlogs, high school events. Everything is on the internet. If it isn't on the internet, it didn't happen, right? It's all over the place. But at the same time, divergence really sets in. All right? People start getting their information from a variety of different sources. All right? Technology allows content to be edited, taken out of context, overhyped, and become divisive. All right? The community audience is splintered. News outlets become as much opinion as news, and they blur the line between the two. Also, if you're conservative, what do? You're watching more conservative stations and you're getting news that leans to stroke your emotions so that you keep tuning back in to get your conservative news and get your fill. If you're on the left and you're more liberal, you're more likely to watch MSNBC. Again, they'll stoke your emotions and they'll tell you those conservatives are so bad because emotion equals ratings, people. The two things that sell are sex and emotions. And when they can combine both of those, man, the media is in heaven, let me tell you. But that, it's created the divisive culture and distrust among everybody that is prevalent today. This is the divergence that came about as the result of the convergence of the previous decade. Again, it's definitely easier to get the information out to the entire world than it is to just your community. That's terrible, but it's the absolute truth. Now, technology and wmpa. All right? It's really come a long way. Just in the past couple weeks, I got a hotspot. I can stream live from anywhere in the world that I can get the data out via Ethernet, Wi-Fi, internet, 5G. Any way that I can transmit that data out, I can go live from there. I can stream to the cable station, to YouTube, to Facebook, countless other places at the same time. That's mind-boggling compared to where I started out in the 1980s. It just absolutely blows my mind. All right. We got cameras in the field. I bought some PTZ cameras. I could have 5 cameras going now with my current setup at any given time. 2 of them would be operated by video operators. The third one, the other 3 cameras, would be operated by one person operating them off a Cat 6 cable with a joystick controller. Amazing. And I'll take this even a step further. There's actually programs out there now, if I wanted to subscribe to them, I could set these cameras up at the football game, for instance, come back here to Piqua, to my house, get online, and produce the entire production and stream it from my house in Piqua, Ohio. That's where the technology is at. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Well, for years I did one thing at a time. Now, a couple times a year, I might have a council meeting streaming and a sporting event going on at the same time. If I got the equipment and the people to spread it around, I can do multiple broadcasts at the same time. Now, granted, only one of them can go out over the cable system at a time, but I could have, countless programs going to YouTube simultaneously. Unbelievable. Unthinkable just a short time ago. Starting this year, we can do instant replays. We could add a telestrator if we desired. We can have real-time graphics. All we're limited to now is what my personnel situation is and how heavy of a workflow we can handle. I can hang with the big boys. Now, I can't put that yellow line on the football field that tells you where the first down marker is. I could probably figure out a poor man's way of doing that, but not quite there yet. But can't do, the drones and the sky cam. I could, but just don't have the personnel for that kind of thing. But I can hang with the big guys really well in this day and age. Now the future, 2025 and beyond. All right. Cable's done, folks. They don't give a hoot about the cable access stations. Our current transmitter there is going to fail any day now. It's something that they paid and installed for. 2 or 3 different versions of it over 40 years. Now they're saying when that goes, we have to pay the 10 grand to get a new one and get it installed. And then they want to charge us $500-600 a month to supply them with content. So that's not happening, folks. We're going to use the thing we got now. When it dies, we're off cable. We're done with them. We get no franchise fees from them anymore, no nothing. All they want to do is charge us. So they no longer see us as an asset, and we no longer see them as an asset, to be perfectly honest with you. There's not enough viewers on cable anymore to justify the expense that would be related to doing that. As I just mentioned, the viewership just doesn't justify the expense. 24/7 operations, they do continue. They're on the cable channel 5. We also have a 24/7 stream on YouTube, which you can access anytime and just use it as your background. If you need a little white noise or need a little something on the screen to keep you calm, look that up, turn it on. You won't be disappointed. But on demand, that's the present, that's the future. People don't want to have to say, oh, I got to get home at 7 o'clock, to watch the football game. If they can do that, that's great, and they do, but they want to be able, if I don't get home to 10, they want to be able to get home at 10 and watch the football game on their schedule and on demand. And that is the present and the future of video content. All right, the capabilities and need of local or in-house media will increase as local newspapers continue to die, fake news runs amok, downsized or TV and radio stations focus less and less on the smaller communities like ours, and that's just going to shift their mission and focus. Divergence is going to continue. Information outlets will continue to pick and choose what they allow shared and promote, and the audience will continue to gravitate to sites that suit their own personal taste, not sites to give them the accurate information. Divergence promotes division. We're in a war, folks. And, we are. It's an information war. It's a war of ideas. Just look at social media and what most of those threads are. We are in a war, folks. It's very divisive and something that could be so great and uniting. It's a shame that all that technology is going the other direction. Local media, you still got wmpa. You got the big corporate controlled media. You still got a lot of local websites, though. I've noticed as time goes by, fewer and fewer updates on those sites. I explain to people that the purpose the websites serve is if somebody's looking for you, they will find your website. If you are looking to reach out to people, websites are not the way for you to go. Social media is probably a more likely option. Facebook, just in West Melton. WMPA has a Facebook page. The police have a Facebook page. The municipality itself has a Facebook page. So there, we have 3 Facebook pages just coming out of the municipality of West Melton. You got the school athletic page. You got all kinds of assorted groups. You got Twitter. You got Instagram. You got YouTube. You got TikTok. You got Snapchat. You got One Call Now. Then you got countless other fake or agenda-driven sites. It's just ridiculous what you have to go through to get the message out to the masses and do it in an informative, unbiased, and transparent way. Technology. Artificial intelligence. It's coming, people. There are a lot of cameras out there now that can track fairly well basketball games. They'll try to soccer games. If you got a kid playing sports and you brought up a huddle cam, you've seen it. It's a little clunky yet, but it's right on the cusp. It won't be long. Artificial intelligence will rule the roost. I'll even say in 10 years, I could set up something at the cable station, tell it that the council meeting starts at 7:30, and it could probably do all the camera movements, the audio switching. All that'll be automated, and I'll be out of a job. That's the direction it's going, folks. Current trends. I talked about divergence. And how everything's so splittered. Well, if you watch any government meeting, pick what's been terrible lately. Springfield, school board meetings in Virginia. There's a lot of bitterness and anger out there and confrontation, and governments and schools are getting tired of that. So what they're deciding to do is, heck, we're not going to stream or record it anymore. So instead of going out in front of people and giving accurate, transparent information, a lot of places are going the other way and trying to keep it quiet and low key. That's wrong, people. You want that transparency, you want that openness, you want that free flow of honest, unbiased information. Part of that, though, another way is if you look up access stations on the East and West Coast in particular, and the big cities, you ought to look at their programming schedules, folks. It's all political propaganda. If you wonder where these leftist views, if you're not a leftist and you wonder where these cities are getting these crazy ideas in their head, you look at their community access stations. They've taken advantage of the opportunity that those stations offer, and they've hijacked many of them, and a lot of them are just simple propaganda stations. WMPA, I fight that. I'm all for transparency. If council or someone in the city building mentions something that I disagree with it, I do fight the fight for you, people. I've invested a lot of time in it. I believe in it strongly. Over the years, we've done Meet the Candidates nights. If we let a Republican come and talk, if a Democrat wants to come and talk, we give them the same treatment. We give them equal time. We put in the same amount of effort. When it comes to politics, we do our very best to just go right down the middle and be open and transparent. That's very, very important. Current trends. Money, 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 money. All right. Sporting events have been tricky. Many people think that if we come and live stream these sporting events, people don't show up. Got a chance to sort of prove that wrong. We did a lot of live streaming during COVID because there wasn't a crowd there. And it was welcomed and well received, and probably one of the most rewarding eras that I've been involved with at the cable station. But still, that opinion existed. So coming out of COVID, we had a year where they're like, well, a lot of people probably shouldn't be out, or I don't think it'll be comfortable coming out, so we're going to stream and let people come watch the games. Well, you know what, people? I have not witnessed a significant downsizing of attendance since we started streaming. I'm not saying that it never happens. If the weather's bad, I'm sure a few people do stay home and watch. But all in all, there have been far more positives than negatives. It really hasn't affected the gates at the schools significantly, if at all. If anything, it's been an exception to divergence in that people around the country and the world, Milton Union Bulldogs, can sit down on a Friday night for 2 or 3 hours, forget about the worries, and just simply be back home at Milton Union Football Field, Memorial Stadium, and be Bulldogs again. Or you got grandparents in other states too frail and old and can't get back home to watch their grandkids play that sit there and watch their grandkids play. You got uncles. You might have big brothers away at college on a bus. Little brother gets a pick six, goes crazy on the bus, and everybody on the bus is, hey, what's going on? Next thing you know it, you got a busload of kids looking over one guy's shoulder watching a Milton Union football game. True stories, folks. That makes it worth it. Those kind of stories alone make what I've done for 39 years absolutely worth it. And that's why I do what I do. That being said, there's some threats ahead. I think we've kicked the attendance issue. We've gotten that one off our back. But of NIL in college, folks, well, there's a push on to bring that down to high school. If NIL ever reaches the high school level, folks, it's over. I mean, at that point, I could have the quarterback of the team coming and wanting money to be on TV. I don't make money. I don't have the money. It won't happen. You got a lot of schools that are saying, hey, let's put up a paywall and make these all pay-per-view events. You go Google football in Texas. I mean, you can buy a package. You might be like $100. You can watch the sporting events for a high school football, basketball for a little year, or 1 year subscription, and that ain't too bad. And that might be something that does happen down the road, as long as it's done in a reasonable way and isn't too expensive. But it's even going more than that. There are some stations like, oh, we'll give you, let's take Milton for example. Oh, we're going to broadcast 10 football games. You can get 8 of them for $100, but if you want to be able to sit down and watch the games against Miami East and Valley View, you got to pay $150. It's sort of like wanting to buy that ticket to jump the line at the amusement parks. Some money into local media is a welcome thing, and I do think we need to look at maybe being able to have some sponsors, like first quarter brought to you by Sour Mugs. Wouldn't that be great? And I would like to see some stuff like that. I think it's reasonable. Expecting a small station in a town like West Milton to be able to survive based on sponsorships and pay-per-view buys, that kind of stuff. For our community, I don't think that's practical. But I think some sponsorships could go a bit of a ways, and that's something that might come. Keeping it as free as possible is ultimately the goal. People got enough bills to pay. If we can provide the service low cost, free of charge, we should always endeavor to do that. Conclusion: community media is at its best when it's honest and it's free. It's not only a source of entertainment, information, and community, but it also is an archive and a bit of history. What we record, what we post, we are capturing history. How do you put a price on that? All right? While it means focus and abilities, while the cable station's means of financing itself, its focus and its abilities have changed over the decades, the argument could be made that in this era of divergence, community media is absolutely more important than it ever has been before. Do not let it go away. Do not let it be corrupted. Every place that has allowed their community media to shut down has regretted it. Every single one. Local media, its existence should be fought for, and its integrity must be retained. And that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed this program. Lasted about 50 minutes. Have a great day.